How's everybody?
Could be better. Could be much, much better. But still functioning. How about yourself?
It's the slogan of 2020. Not so sure about the still functioning part. Let's see. Let me make a list of who's today. Next.
I know that I was like tail end of what was supposed to be presented today, but I don't have some of my extended family are not um distractions occurred.
Okay.
I'll try to get everything in by the end of the day.
Okay. Are you all right?
I just don't know how in your right mind you can be first degree exposed to go
Yep.
through the quarantine, and then have the okay, I've 2 weeks, we're good to go. We lucked out. We need to get everyone here for Thanksgiving. Oh no, we will come get you for Thanksgiving. That has been the conversation I have been having is no, for the love of God, no. Like, stay
Yeah.
over there.
Yeah. No, I feel that. It's hard to convince the world of. I don't even know how we got to this point where, like, this is a thing that has just gotten so politicized, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's because it's the same sort of thing. Because I was having a conversation with the one that was QAnon, because I was saying, hey, you mind talking to me for a bit? I could use you for a source for a paper. And initially he was down with it, but I was trying to point out, it's like, well, these are the roots of where this theory is coming from. Like, I'm trying to figure out, how does it operate from your perspective? He's like, oh no, it's cognitive dissonance. I'm like, no, like the decoders, like that's what you all are saying. Like, I'm not imposing this upon you. The crowd, the group is saying this, that you're translating a 74-year-old president's typos, and that is somehow telling pedophiles in the government. I want to know how that works. Like,
So, sorry to stop you. I just we have to get on the timeline here.
yeah,
We
sorry, my
can
bad.
chat about this later. I feel you. So, okay, we have a little bit more leeway today than we will this time next week, but not much. Uh, I have here scheduled to present Bailey, Alexa, Desmo, Jesse, Lauren, Criscio, Quinlan, and Joseph. I guess person's not here yet. And before we start, so the rubrics on the syllabus, for this presentation, I'm going to give the floor to each person in their turn. And I'll grade the poster style and organization later. Today is just going to be me talking to students, and I'm going to be paying attention to how quickly and thoroughly you can summarize your poster, similarly to answering brief questions from myself, and then understanding the issue. And if there's any, well, actually, let me pause and see if there's any questions. No? Okay, so we have, I guess, I'm going to try to keep everybody to about 5. Do you have to show your face? You do not. You do not have to show your face. Some people don't even don't have cameras. So, yes. So I'm going to try to give everybody 5 minutes total. So it'll be 1 or 2 minutes to present and a couple of minutes for me asking questions, much like a regular poster session. The first half of the class is a little bit lax, so we might actually wrap up quickly. Well, 40 minutes rather than 60. But yeah. So any questions or comments before I let Bailey take the floor? So Bailey, are you ready? You're first in line, which actually makes it I'll be most lax with you than with anybody else because you're first into the firing squad.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll get my lineup started.
Okay, you can share your screen if you want. I think I've allowed that. And would you feel more comfortable if you could see everybody's faces or not? Does it matter?
I don't care.
Okay.
Whatever everyone else is comfortable with, that it's easier than talking to a room full of people either way.
Sounds great. Okay, so we will. I'll start you now. Tell me about your poster.
So it's my final, and it's basically the full breakdown of my thesis. So my guiding question is, how does modularity allow for perception, considering that perception is an integrative and an interactive system of our various domains and inputs to interact with our environments, which is actually the integration slide right here. Mm-hmm. Also, encapsulation of information was one of my other points where I couldn't see how modularity allowed for perception because of the fact that if information and modules are encapsulated, information sharing is more difficult. And for perception, I have illusions of senses where, for me, if I watch a video with no sound, but I see something jumping, I can hear thudding. But that makes no sense if it's encapsulated, or even if there's one level is only supposed to share information with one level and there's no higher level of sharing. So that was where I found questions and where I decided I was going to make my thesis. So how is it allowable? And again, it's because when perception is a sharing of various resources, and interactions aren't just of one level, but of higher tiers. And yeah, so other examples of illusions would have been people can see, when they see colors, they smell certain things, or even some people smell things and think of colors. So there's small little issues if you do Freudian modularity that don't seem to allow for perception. And that was my poster.
Excellent, thank you. So if you think that modularity and perception conflict, do you think that we should get rid of modularity altogether?
I really looked at like our one reading, and they did talk about allowing for like not having information encapsulated and allowing for interaction between modules. But it still doesn't seem to make sense to me if we're boxing things and putting modules in. If certain boxes are taking from other boxes, how can you still have that box? So I think modularity doesn't allow for it at all.
Awesome. And you said that you think that there might be some other things that conflict with modularity. So aside from perception, do you have can you say that point again, or can you give other examples where you think that there might be other conflicts?
Imagination and memory were other two.
Cool.
Like for children, they have really vivid imaginations and can say they're like talking with people that aren't there. They can feel them, which again brings into questions those higher levels interacting. And same with memory. If my sight is only my sight and my smell is only my smell, how can I smell something and picture my Thanksgiving dinner? So memory was like another one where I questioned, again, all that's perception, but that was like, the modularity doesn't allow for this if everything is encapsulated and isn't sharing of information.
Awesome. And so this seems like you're specifically targeting the Fodor's account of, well, actually,
I was really targeting like Freuders. He's
okay.
yeah, the classical sense was really where I was like, that's where I can hit it because it's very rigid. The other ones are more, they allow, you can break certain rules or you can bend and move how that rule will fit a certain thing. So I figured Freuders was like, that one's all rigid. And if you're going to have rules, they're supposed to be rigid.
Awesome, awesome. So if modularity is the wrong approach, do you think that there's a more, so what's the alternative, I guess?
I guess I've come down on the side of like connectionism or those offshoots because of the fact that it is like a computer where there's a lot of like data and input sharing that's being fired to multiple places and not just one. So I've kind of leaning on that side of the spectrum.
And is it a holistic connectionism, like everything is connected to everything, or there's degrees of connection?
I think it's holistic. I think
okay, cool.
Everything's attached, even like if it's minutely, like everything, because it only seems it's the only thing that like allows for the weird things people have with their brains. Where again, like I can watch a video with no sound, but I can hear and feel thudding and swear it. Like doesn't matter. So I think that's like the only one that allows for the weird interpretations people have with their brains.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is thank you for going first. You're done, and I think you did great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I can move right ahead to Alexa, but first let me pause to see if anybody wants to say anything or yeah, fair. Applause. There we go. Sure. Applause gif. Thank you so much. Okay, if there's nothing, no concerns, questions, comments, let's move on to Alexa. How's it going?
Hey, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm feeling a little under the weather, so
Okay.
don't mind the mess. I'm gonna see if I can share my screen. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I am basically arguing for more use of brain imaging techniques as they are essential for developing the field of cognitive neuroscience, in which we can start to map out and model different neural networks in order to enable like biological explanations for cognitive functions and impairments. And then in providing those mappings, I also argue that there can be more improvement for AI and treatments of mental illness. So I defined a little bit kind of the theories and the approaches that I wanted to use on my paper, and just kind of just reinforcing the fact that modeling the brain and creating those different mappings are really gonna help us develop things like the Blue Brain Project, where they're trying to digitally reconstruct a mouse brain at the moment, kind of with a biological blueprint, which is pretty crazy if you if you ask me. And then with the hopes of maybe doing that with the human brain, the more like complex that we can get to. Reconstructing the brain essentially. I also brought up some cognitive impairments where we physically see physical trauma, biological trauma that impact cognition. And then just some opposing views to my argument would be like the behaviorist views, where the idea is that people or organisms are more reactionary versus you know, actually being thought out. And excuse me.
Sure.
And then I just remember one of the points that you had brought up, whether or not it is dangerous to kind of pinpoint every dysfunction to actual damage to a specific part of the brain, or if it could actually be failure to send a message to other portions of the brain. So that's something to consider as well. We can't just deduce it to one thing. And then another thing would be that biological basis does not always account for psychological and non-physical trauma, and also taking into account abstract thoughts and emotions.
Excellent. So on that last point, one of the interesting distinctions is between the level of implementation, that is like what the brain is actually doing, and the level of, sometimes they call it an algorithm or analysis. And it seems like you think that there should be a stronger relationship. Like you can't divorce what brains actually do from how we think. Is that true? Am I reading you right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going with.
Yeah, go
ahead.
And you don't think that the current imaging techniques are sufficient for a thorough understanding of the brain presently?
I don't think so. I think that we still have a lot of work to do. I think also bringing in not just imaging, but also bringing in genetics and other things that can cause cognitive impairments. I'm also taking a neurobiology of mental illness, and one of the main things that we bring up is how we're trying to treat symptoms, but we should also be looking at where the origin starts, and these imaging techniques are not allowing for, I guess, viewing that, seeing how to help mental illness. I guess that's where I bring that argument as well.
Excellent. So it's my understanding that a lot of the mental illnesses that we have in the DSM, we don't have biological tests for. But you think if we had more information about how the brain works, we might be able to more accurately diagnose things like schizophrenia or whatnot?
Absolutely. I do think that if we are able to kind of pinpoint kind of where that mental illness starts, or where it even develops from, or how those different connections kind of communicate with one another to create that mental illness, I think we will have a lot more breakthrough in how to treat that. But then I guess one of the big things that I also bring up against that are like the more abstract things. Not everything is physical trauma. You can go through psychological things as well, that we might not account for with these with new neuroimaging techniques.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It goes by quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Applause gift. Where's my applause gift? There we go. Okay, so next, there's a little bit of a gap, but the next person would be Desmo. I don't know if you want to jump on.
Yeah, definitely. Let me
That's great.
figure out how to do it again. I've only done this once. I also have 2 monitors, so I hope Zoom's
Excellent.
intelligent enough to handle that. I'm clicking on her share button. Oops.
Oh, yeah. Alexa, can I ask you to stop sharing? It's at the top at the little red thing. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, do you guys see a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. My presentation is going to be about cultural cognition and how it delivers this massively social modularity to human intelligence. Just as a refresher, cognition is defined as a process that acquires information or knowledge. So individuals treat their own cognitive processes as belonging to a centralized entity or a person. However, the mind responsible for said cognitive processes is undeniably modular. It's full of these different domains and explicit and implicit processes. This modularity can boil down to parallel processing, which mental architectures seek to model. Essentially, different parts of the brain do different things. They're parallel in the sense that you can smell flowers and think about Wednesday at the same time, but how are those processes related? Are they vertical? Are they hierarchical? Are they frequential, like I think connectionist systems try to suggest? Some people, for instance, think that central cognition is sandwiched between modular peripherals. Other people think that sounds crazy. And culture, like an individual, emerges or appears as a centralized impression. From a biological evolutionary standpoint, culture is no more than a neat way to pass on information, or schemata, to use architectural terms. It's typically prescriptive. There's ecological instruction of what to do and what not to do. So this would represent explicit cognition pretty well. More characteristically human, it's typically infused with morality. So these rationalizations and like unconscious morality that kind of affects our decision. It represents implicit processes or implicit cognition. So why is culture massively modular? It's because, like we saw on the left side of the poster, culture is a process between minds, and minds themselves are a process of many different modules. You can kind of make this argument about anything in reality being massively modular, because if you deconstruct it enough, it's just cells communicating. But the social aspect, that's what characterizes human intelligence. I think it's that like element in which human intelligence only exists or grows within an environment that is already full of human intelligence that can inform it, because a human without culture is a very strange intelligence. It wouldn't be very recognizable to us. But my essay isn't about this analogy. I think the analogy just kind of supports what I want to argue, which is that cognitive realism and the broad human characteristics of human intelligence are represented by mental architecture if the cognitive processes develop within architecture which integrates offloaded cognition, analogous to how individual minds integrate conventional thinking from their specific culture. But more than just integration, there needs to be communication or sociability between domains as to reflect cultural evolution. And I think the specific mental architecture we read about Sigma is really conducive for this effort. And I think that would be the best mental architecture to try to formalize culture as a like offloaded cognition that you can kind of integrate into intelligent processes.
This is awesome. I keep thinking about, well, how you might approach this from an embodied.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking about offloading cognition, which is, in a sense, one of the insights from embodied cognition, but that has been developed in a bunch of other views. So can you walk me through your process as to why, for example, a classical computational approach won't work here? Or
yeah, there doesn't seem to be much like familiar conflict within these evenly distributed processors, in which like a big argument against culture as this like unique form of offloaded cognition would be the idea that through multiple simulations, a single cognitive process or artificial intelligence can kind of like emulate culture just by going off the information of its past processes. And this is not going to achieve the same thing cultural cognition would, because it lacks the things that really make cultural cognition interesting, which is there's a conflict between what's good for the individual and what's good for the society as a whole, as well as there's this like individual uniqueness for modules that are like participating in a culture, such that the cognitive processes achieved by these specific domains are gonna have like wildly different, I guess, values. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay, so maybe here's another question that's kind of unrelated, but kind of directly related. Um, how small can culture get? Like, is it just one other mind? Is it
Really small. That's actually one of
Okay.
like the what's it called? Desiderata of Sigma. The
Nice.
second desiderata wants it to be, where is it? I wrote it down. Emergence from a small set of mechanisms. So taking this biological evolutionary standpoint really encourages that kind of efficiency, and efficiency is really achieved when you can perform the task with like that small set of mechanisms. So I think culture reflects that ability in the fact that you can have like a culture for your specific chess club, just like you can have a culture that permeates your country. And these cultures can like inform your decisions and inform you with like super unique cognitions, like a chess club that may value aggression or entertainment over pure victory, stuff like that. I feel like any like minuscule semblance of culture starts getting created as soon as you have the bare minimum parts, which are at least, two human people.
So individuating cognition and culture, and I mean, it's just going to be, you can draw any number of lines all over the place.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Let's see. We have, well, technically we have 7 minutes until Jesse's presentation, but Jesse, you're here. I don't know if you feel.
I am.
If you feel
I think
ready
I'm ready to go. I can go a little early. Cool with that.
Oh yeah, clap emoji. There we go. Is that an emoji? That's an emoji. Yes. So you're able to share your screen if you want.
Yeah. All right. Can you see it?
Yes. Awesome. Cool.
Okay. So some basic context on this, because this does rely on some outside information that isn't necessarily contained in the slide explicitly. Carlos, are you familiar with Douglas Harding's Science of the First Person Experience? Is this familiar to you at all?
Not intimately. I've heard
So
of it, but yeah.
I'll give you kind of a basic rundown on. I mean, it's essentially kind of a Copernican turn in a sense, because Harding's essential observation is that consciousness and the subjective experience of scientists and just people is generally sort of ruled out as having kind of no good role to play in science. It's something to be avoided or explained rather than having any explanatory power in and of itself. And Harding says that it's the other way around, that your first person experience, your subjective experience, can contribute to science, and it can be a science of its own. So that's the science of the first person, or science one, in this slide. And the essential idea of science one and the way it conducts experiments is really just through direct experience. One kind of famous one is called the pointing experiment, and it's really just kind of a framing device, sort of directed to point at your own face. And kind of the idea is to help you realize that, well, you can't see your own face. You're sort of looking out of this sort of open space. And the root idea is that you are just awareness itself. And that's sort of the final level of reduction. And that's what everything sort of reduces to. So it's very sort of Buddha-like in that sense. It's very sort of Eastern. And that's the sort of outside context. What I'm exploring here is what implications the science of the first person has for psychology, specifically behavioral psychology. There are sort of three major ones that kind of build on each other. The first basic one is that behavior is headless. In other words, it occurs in one domain. That's sort of a premise of behavioral epistemology, that behavior and its causes don't come from sort of different domains. So it's sort of a rejection of mentalism. And in the science of the first person, everything comes from one domain too. And so that's sort of the ultimate domain.
So can I'm wondering exactly how this connects to something, previous studies of behavior, i.e. behaviorism, because the connection just seems to be the word here, but there might be like a stronger relationship.
So could you give more context on your question, just so I know where to direct?
Yeah, so it seems like you're able to talk about the consciousness, the domain of studying, and the behaviorist approach from 100 years ago was avoiding this
Sure.
altogether.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, like, is there a deeper connection that I'm missing, or is it just?
Yeah. So this is definitely relying more on like a contemporary behavior analytic position.
Okay.
And the essential idea is that, like, because there's a distinction in behavior analysis between overt behaviors and covert behaviors, but the only real distinction between these two is whether or not other people other than the behavior can notice them. So in other words, thoughts are covert behaviors, but they're still behavior, and the only reason they're covert is just because you as behavior or behavior are the only one who's aware of them. And so when you apply this sort of thinking to the science of the first person experience, your own behavior and the behavior of other people, it's all just behavior that's sort of occurring in consciousness. Even if, like, at a kind of metaphysical level, some guy walking across the street is overt behavior and my thoughts are covert behavior, it's still all behavior that's occurring in consciousness for me. So that's why it's in this sort of singular domain. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And does it top? So you think it tops out there? Why not allow it to just keep going, right? So in a sense, this is kind of like an anti-reductionist position. You're not saying that behavior should be understood by underlying features. You're saying the underlying features should be understood by behavior.
Sure.
Why not just go behavior should be understood by culture and culture should be understood by? Actually, I think I'm out of levels there.
Well, at like a kind of a macro level, because Skinner did talk about like contingencies of culture. A lot of behavior analysts are sort of concerned with that. And I know there's some labs at UNR that are actually investigating the role of culture in behavior. And this is really kind of a sort of a direct experiential analysis. It's not so much that culture doesn't matter and isn't important. It's just that for sort of the singular instances of behavior, and at a basic epistemological level, it's in this sort of singular.
This is where you start, in other words.
Yes,
yeah.
This is your sort of starting point. Yeah, exactly. This is sort of first broad implication. It's the sort of the basic one, which brings us to the second implication, which is, I think, probably the most important one, which is that psychology, when you view it through Harding's science of the first person experience, actually becomes science two, or science of the second person. Because Harding, in his line of thought, sort of distinguished between science of the first person and science of the third person. So science of the third person is just treating everything as an object, even yourself. And it's sort of that's why it tries to be objective. It's trying to turn everything it can into objects. And psychology can be sort of a bridge between these two. It can be sort of intermediate between science 1 and science 3. And that's just because behavior is obviously an object of consciousness. It's happening in consciousness in that sort of singular domain, but it can also be about consciousness. In other words, if someone's meditating and they're paying attention to their breath, and they're sort of focusing on, well, what does consciousness feel like? Do I have a self? And you're sort of doing all these mindful practices. That's behavior that is about consciousness. And this can apply to and across people, and psychology can sort of investigate this bridge, which is kind of why it can be thought of as science 2, science the second person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's cool. Okay, I think we should probably move on, but this is great. Thank you.
Sweet.
Clapping emoji. There we go. Awesome. So let's see. Lauren is. When are you? Oh, you're not scheduled until 15 minutes from now.
That's okay. That's okay. I can go now.
Okay, that's great. Let's do that.
Okay. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So the question that I wanted to ask in my paper is, can AI truly have genuine understanding? And I wanted to come at this from the approach of Searle's translation room. And I want to argue that the translation room is in itself a faulty analogy or argument, because it doesn't really address the possibility that machines can learn to understand language. And it ignores the possibility that maybe this, like the translation room, how it works is how language works in our minds. So I offer like 2 modifications in order to address this. So the first modification would be that the operator inside the room could see and or hear outside, and this would allow them to make like associations and kind of like assign like qualia or substance to the Chinese symbols that they're taking. Like, so for example, if they could see that the person they're talking to is holding an apple and they keep getting the Chinese symbol for apple in the room, then they eventually start to be like, they understand now that like that visual of the apple is the Chinese symbol. And so now they understand like that means apple. So imagine that, but with more and more words and phrases. And eventually I think you could gain and understand the language and get all the way there. And so an objection to that would be, does allowing the room to interact with the world really add to it in any significant way? And I say yes, because it just it changes it from just simple like input and output without anything surrounding it or connected to it. It adds substance and qualia, so thus like it can relate it and understand the language. Kind of like, it reminds me of the scientist who studies the color red, but they're like colorblind, or they're in this black and white room and they know all about the color red. So they're very knowledgeable of it, but until they see the color red, they don't really understand it. So I think that it's necessary to have like that outside stimuli or input to be able to like really understand like what you're talking about with your language, you know, besides like just the rules. So my other modification is, instead of being able to see outside the room, the operator would have translations within the rule book. So when they get a Chinese symbol in, and they flip to the rule book to find the matching Chinese symbol to put out, there's English translations underneath. So eventually they would learn the rules of language, learn the syntax, and then be able to understand the semantics of it. And the objection to this would be, well, Searle posed this argument where he said, so if I had a module inside of myself that processed Chinese like this, would I really understand Chinese? Like, is that really understanding? And I would argue that yes, I think that language could work like this. And I think about this in like the context of learning a second language, as in like when you're in the beginning process of learning a second language, you're taking it into your mind and you're translating it into your mother tongue, thinking of your response in your mother tongue, and then translating it back into the other language and putting it out into the world. And I would consider that understanding, even though it technically is like input, output, and translation. So when you add all these, or when you modify the room in one of these 2 ways, and there's other ways to modify the room, I think it becomes more of a genuine like analogy to the human mind. And I think that AI really can understand like how we understand language, because I feel like as Searle's translation room is, like without the modifications, it's too simplistic. Like it's kind of akin to a gear and a clock. Like you can't ask a gear and a clock to tell time. And so I think like you either need like to sign like the qualia or like the outside world, or be able to like have some form of translation. And so then eventually the machine or the room could learn the language and like understand and produce complex original thoughts.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm trying to figure out what the added benefit is from an outside world or a Chinese to English thing that you wouldn't get from just having like a whole bunch of time. Just like spending a bunch of time in the room, you see a bunch of symbols that you don't understand, and eventually you draw connections between them. And I think the difference would be something like that you don't know whether this symbol meaning that actually means how you interpret it. But yeah, I guess what I just want you to develop the first rejoinder a little bit more. What do you get there that you wouldn't get from just spending years in the room looking at symbols?
Yeah, I considered that. Like I was thinking about maybe if we didn't even add any like connection to what they are talking about, like what the symbols mean, would they eventually be able to learn like the syntax of the language and like be able to derive it? But I don't know. I don't know if they could, if you just have symbols, like endlessly symbols, like eventually you would learn like these symbols always correspond to these symbols. I think you could learn the syntax, but I don't know if you could learn the semantics of it. I think you would need outside input or like outside stimuli in order to really like understand a language, because you have to understand like what it is talking about, you know?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Like it has to like latch onto a thing. So this is an argument from analogy, and you're saying that Searle's analogy is a weak analogy, and you wanna beef it up. But that still leaves open the possibility that it could just be completely wrong, that there could be another way the mind works, and it's not just getting inputs and outputs, it's more of a connectionist approach, or it's more of some other approach. What would you say to something like that?
I think that's a good point. I actually kind of ran across that. I was thinking about it, and I felt like the more I thought about it, the more I was like, am I really just changing the argument too much at this point? Like, am I just like proposing a whole different like system, like where you need like outside input and all this stuff? But I mean, I don't know. I kind of relate it back to like the physical symbol systems hypothesis, where like human thinking is symbol manipulation and combination, and you can like create new expressions in that way. So I don't know. The translation room, where you're getting like input and output, I'm not sure.
So if strong AI can exist, do you think we will create strong AI?
Yes, I think it can exist. I think we just have to go at it the right way. And maybe, I know it's kind of a future science cop-out type of argument, but maybe we do just have to give them like the ability to sense things, and like beyond just giving them rules for language and stuff, like we have to give them like smell, sight, hearing, in order to like really understand the world and like assign meaning to the words that we give them and the rules that we give them to use the words.
Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, that's clapping emoji. Where's my clapping emoji? Why can't I get back to you? Hello? Class?
We can hear you and see you.
I can hear you.
Can you not see us?
Okay, I can see you. There we go.
Cool,
Okay, I don't
cool.
know what just happened. Okay, so let's see. We could go on if the next person, which I think is Krisha. Hello. Are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. I wonder what happened that I couldn't see you guys for a hot second.
Okay. So
Excellent.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah. Tell us about your poster.
Okay, so I decided to do mine as well on brain imaging technique, but my argument was that I think that imaging technique was important to cognitive neuroscience, and then this is probably what my paper structure is going to look like. So I first introduced the brain imaging technique, and I talk about how there's weaknesses and strengths such as spatial or time resolution, and one brain imaging technique may have a better spatial resolution than the other. Obviously, the person, depending on what the person is trying to find, they would use the appropriate brain imaging technique. And then I go on to talk about, I'm probably gonna talk about some papers. And there was this paper that I found which I really liked because it talks about how they used brain imaging techniques to localize certain activities that the brain produces, which I thought was really cool. And yeah, and then uh, and then after that, something I want to do is try to connect connectionism and mental architecture, because I remember when during the connectionism lecture there was this part where you were talking about how the circles and how the computer will keep trying to make straight lines and then it'll still keep getting it wrong until eventually it'll try to cover the whole thing, which is separating the blue and red circles, which really interested me a lot. And so I thought, when the same as Alexa, I think she was talking about cognitive impairments, I wanted to talk about neurodegenerative disorders. And when somebody, let's say like Alzheimer's, somebody was experiencing that, obviously sometimes it's just hard to just see it on like a brain scan. So I wanted to like try to talk about how maybe connectionism, since it produces um other representations of cognition using neural networks, I wanted to see how it would show it computationally, I guess. And then yeah, and then so that's probably something I really wanted to, I'm probably going to talk about a lot on my paper. And then so for my conclusion, I basically just said that brain imaging techniques is essential to cognitive neuroscience. And I just think like with connectionism and mental architecture and brain imaging techniques, maybe they can go hand in hand with each other to help like better understand each other for when you're presenting it to other people.
Right. Okay. So this is interesting. I sort of want to you said that there's these different brain imaging techniques are more or less precise than each other, but I understand that they're actually targeting different parts of, or right. So some of them are looking at blood flow, others are looking at blood oxygenation, others are whatever, electrical conductivity. How do you think that those all relate to each other, and do you think that they all give us? First, how do you think they relate to each other?
How do I think all those?
Yeah. How can we just directly translate from one to the other to develop a stronger understanding of the mind?
Oh, well, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the MRI because it shows the structure of the brain, and there's also the EEG, which that one there's the this is the non-invasive one where you see neural activity, but there's also ECOG, but that one is really invasive because they do it right on your brain, I think. Yeah. And I think it kind of puts them all together to show how, because obviously when you see the structure and then you see the neural activity, you can see where exactly it is happening, or not exactly where it's happening because localization isn't really clear yet. But with the structure, you can see where the blood flow is happening, or maybe the yeah, if that
And
answers.
what, yeah, and so you think that using this in conjunction with a connectionist understanding of the brain might help us represent cognition. But it strikes me that connectionism is developed because of understanding of the brain, right? So it's in essence using the same sort of thing, just different sides of it. I guess I'm trying to give you a good question here, and I'm trying to give you a good chance here. My question is how connectionism, how does connectionism play in here in a way that other cognitive architectures might not play a role?
I'm not sure actually.
Okay. So do you think that using any of these brain imaging techniques, you said that we can maybe localize certain activities, figure out what's going on in certain places. But connectionism, typically understood, is lots of connections around. Do you want to also allow for modularity, perhaps?
I'm not sure because I didn't really look into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No worries. So you're talking about looking into the brain, and why do you think it's important to have a biological understanding in order to develop an understanding of how the mind works?
Because cognitive neuroscience, it was talking about how it was studying neural processes, which I thought was important when regards with neurodegenerative disorders. As time progresses, well, we want to see how the neurals not stop processing, but slowly not do what they're supposed to do as time goes on, as the disorder gets it gets more aggressive, and like essentially like with Alzheimer's, when it progresses more, then yeah, I want to see how like that works, I guess. And sometimes like with just like looking at scans, it might not be as efficient. So I thought maybe with connectionism, it would help it would just help show it another way with neural networks, I guess.
Well, seeing how the parts fall apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Clapping emoji. Let's see. Quinlan, I think you're next. Where are you? Are you here? Huh. I don't know if you are. Okay. And Joseph, you said you were not ready today, right?
No, I was
Okay.
the project was focused on linguistic development, specifically bilingualism in comparison to delayed L1 attainment, such as in the case of Genie. And I was not able to find the academic sources that were kind of going to be front and center for that. So I have the argument, but I don't have the numbers to justify it.
Okay, we'll talk later then. We'll set up a time.
Okay. Sorry about that, by the way.
No, you're good. So I think that's everybody on the schedule for the day. Does anybody want to chat about how things? Was it scary for people? Did you guys learn something? Do you guys want to chat about it? thoughts?
I kind of want to talk about the translation room just because it's interesting,
do
but
it.
that's not really related to your question too much. So the analogy or the thought experiment is there's a dude in a room receiving Chinese symbols, and he is like just directly translating it to English. Is that the symbolage? So like he's transcribing.
No. He's taking one symbol, looking into a book
Mhm.
that says, if you see this symbol, move it to this symbol.
Okay.
And then he's producing another symbol. And so in the original, he never understands what's going on. He never understands the symbols.
And he never will, is the idea, right? Because he's just
That's
going through
supposed to be the idea.
computations. Yeah, isn't it?
Right.
It's lacking like imputation rather than computation, right? Because like imputation is just computation, except you're working with missing information, and language is like a pragmatic exchange of information, such that like the semantics that make up the syntax only matter insofar as they are delivered in that specific way. And like you kind of impute, like when someone says that thing over there, you're not like in your brain going through the things that have been cognitively assigned to that. You're kind of imputing rather than what's the other word? Impute versus compute. Yeah, no one's like computed what that is strictly in your brain. So isn't that it's like lacking any sort of like pragmatic element?
Yeah, so it's funny. Like, have you ever pointed it toward something in front of a baby or a dog? Babies will follow the finger. The dogs will just look at your finger, right? And there's something strange there, in that we are able to like leap to certain conclusions, and dogs leap to different conclusions, right? If you pretend to throw something, then the dog will look in that direction. So there's like some imputation that's baked into the cake, in how we process the world, and whether that's cultural or biological, who knows? But it's kind of a fascinating bit.
Yeah, I feel like all the new cognitive architectures have this like common theme called analysis by synthesis, where I took that to mean like there is no like analytic knowledge within the brain per se, because the cognitive processes are literally created, right? They're rationalizations about things. And in that way, it seems like so this cognitive process of like having strict analytical meaning to things and then transcribing it, or I guess you said it wasn't transcribing, but like finding the direct translations doesn't really match up to what's happening in discrete cognitive processes. It seems more like when you go about speaking a language to other people, or when you go about trying to have a cognitive neuro or like artificial intelligence try to learn languages, it's not just like running through analytic syntax. And if it is, it should have like a reflective element that has like some dissonance, right? Where, oh no, the syntax that, or the semantics that I know as a language aren't matching up to the syntax of this new language, right? Because
Sure.
I'm actively imputing what should be a meaningful sentence, and I'm like repeatedly getting nonsense, right?
I sometimes think that we presume that we understand more than we do, and that this entire thought experiment is just like it's presuming that humans ever understand language.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we're all just fucking guessing half of our days.
Doesn't this fall apart with like sarcasm too? Like you can't teach sarcasm, and then like if I were to be sarcastic with you in French, it would be very clear, like because the certain words I'd be using would be different than what I'd be using right now. But like if I'm sarcastic with you in English, it can be really different because we have so many different words having different innuendos, or like we know technically it means like this word, but if I say it in this connotation with these around it, it means a different thing. Like you can't really teach that because you're learning it as like how would you teach that to a computer? Like I don't think you could, because there's so much more involved than instead of just me translating it.
Somebody once described sarcasm as a linguistic trust fall to me, and I've never been able to like get rid of that image, where like you're purposefully saying incorrect things or hurtful things or like like things that are not what you mean sincerely, and yet the people that understand it and are able to converse fully are on board with it. And there's a sense in which you only get it if you are competent enough in the traditional modes of understanding to subvert them, which is kind of cool. Like, I don't know if you could teach that. It basically requires a degree of fluency on top of a degree of fluency.
Because I do, like, at work, like, you know, I'm a Starbucks barista. There's times where you're like saccharine sweet, and it's like, you don't get that already. Like, how do you teach it to a computer?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I feel like that's where like that's another like really hard fall whenever someone's like, AI could be, you know, any of it, because that's difficult.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much we ever truly understand anything. Feels like we understand some stuff, but does my concept of love mean the same as your concept of love? I don't know. Any other thoughts? I see that Quinlan just rejoined. Do you wanna do your poster now, or should we wait until after class? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I can hear you. After class? What do you mean?
Yeah, sorry. I thought that you were. I guess you weren't late. I guess we were just early. Never mind. I'm so sorry. Cool. Do you want to share? Can you share your screen? Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
Did you get a chance to see anybody else's?
I did not. No, I just
Okay.
hopped in.
Okay, cool. No, you're good.
So, maybe I might have to apologize in advance, but we'll see.
No, you're good. So it's a 5 minutes total. I'm basically just gonna ask you for a quick summary and then ask a couple of questions and then move on.
Okay.
Fair?
Can
you share your screen?
I am trying to figure that out now. Oh, okay, I found it. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'll just jump in.
Yeah, let's do it.
For my presentation and final paper, I wanted to explore the relationship between emotions and embodied cognition, how they're both cognitively penetrable, and maybe indicate that much of cognition itself may be embodied. Firstly, it's clear that we aren't very good at effective forecasting, so that, you know, like our offline cognition as it pertains to emotions is pretty shoddy. We also know that there appears to be a relationship between emotions and cognition, and that emotional states aren't exclusively tied to the environment or situations that we experience them in. Excuse me. They become aspects of our mind. Because embodied cognition posits that our cognitive processes are affected by all of the aspects of our being, like the motor system, our assumptions, biases, beliefs, etc., follow that our emotional state as an aspect of the self also affects those processes. This emotional state is cognitively penetrable in that our goals and beliefs alter our emotional responses. Those emotional responses work their way into our cognition, which is how we know that embodied cognition is in itself cognitively penetrable. If even offline cognition, so that's like the long-term planning, you know, things that aren't happening in the moment, is affected by our emotional states, and biases, and beliefs, then it might be that the only cognitive processes that aren't embodied are those which are not cognitively penetrable.
So excellent. Well, actually, first, what are those? And then I'll ask about specific emotions and cognitive penetrability. What are the ones that are not cognitively penetrable?
Yeah, so
do you think?
yeah, this was something that I figured I should have an answer for and don't. Because in reading, like things like vision, for example, which were considered at one time to not be cognitively penetrable, seem like they actually might be, in that I mean, maybe this could just be me projecting, quite frankly, but like if I think about any one thing too hard, I can like change my relationship to it, or like the way I perceive it. This might seem sort of strange, but like, you know, if I stare at something way too long and my vision starts to get blotchy or go dark, I feel like the shapes that I'm looking at might be different. I might perceive it differently. It's hard to say what like cognitive processes for sure aren't cognitively penetrable, but I would imagine like you know, it'd have to be something that's entirely like unconscious.
Is cognitive penetrability in your eyes an all or nothing process? Like, is it binary, or can there be degrees of it?
I feel like I generally take a stance to most things that like there's always nuance. You know, everything's kind of a spectrum. For like plotting this out, I kind of treated it as I guess binary, like something is or it isn't cognitively penetrable. So I guess I would say I looked at it as you know, a yes or no.
And I guess the other version of it would be it could be yes with respect to some features and no with respect to other features. So is that a possibility for you, or is it just still strictly yes or no?
I think it could be definitely like a yes or no with respect to certain things, but yeah, it would depend. It would depend, I think, on the process itself, and how its penetrability changes your like relationship or perception of something.
So the usually the big bugaboo, the big scary thing is long-term planning, which seems like it is, I don't know, less embodied in some way, maybe less subject to emotions, because you're planning things over many different kinds of emotions over, you know, days, weeks, months, years. What do you also think that this applies for this analysis applies to long-term planning?
Yeah, that's actually, I maybe didn't do a very good job making that clear, but that was sort of like what I was thinking about explicitly. It's that like, because even in long-term planning, you want to consider things that aren't, you know, like happening to you either externally, internally, right at that moment, but your like processes, your thinking is still affected by either emotional states that you've felt, you know, in the past, like thoughts that you've had before, like they're all still there, and it's they're like little sections of almost like online cognition built into the, you know, overarching like long-term cognition.
Cool. Awesome. That was great. That's 5 minutes. Thank you. Oh, clap emoji. We've been doing clap emojis.
Oh, nice. So appreciated.
Okay. I guess now we're done with everybody that's going today. And I think I've got my notes on all of these, and if not, I can go back over this. Any other final thoughts from anybody? I think you guys all did great. I think I'll try to get you. I guess some people have turned in their posters, which I appreciate, but I guess if you're presenting them, I can also just like, I am recording this, so I can just keep looking back at it.
You want us to
Yeah.
send you our PowerPoints, the document?
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah, might be easier than trying to like click around on the video to find out when you were going. So okay, I will try to get these in quickly, and next week we've got most of the class left. How did everybody feel? Everybody that's going next week feels prepared now? Yeah?
Yeah, I'll say yes.
Nice. Okay. Sweet. Thank you guys for great class. We've got one more thing and then just the final class period on the 7th. Probably we won't do any more presentations on the 7th unless we literally cannot squeeze everybody in, but I've got something else planned. Should be fun. Yeah.
Thanks, Carlos.
Have a
Thanks,
great
Carlos.
week.
It was fun.
Happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy
You too,
Thanksgiving.
thanks.
Man, happy Thanksgiving. Adios.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say sorry that I like jumped in late. I didn't realize that I got in and I saw that the whole class was there, or at least a lot of the class, and I was like, that's not what I was expecting to see.
I
kinda-
also was not expecting to see that. You're good. Yeah.
It gave me some anxiety at first. I was like, oh no, is this a regular class that I just missed? Oh gosh.
No, you're good. You're good.
Um,
It was a lot of presentations. It was great. Yeah.
Well, that's good. So sad I missed them, but it is what it is.
That's what it is.
Thank you, Professor,
Here.
and happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you too.